I think that the capability that AI gives organizations and non-technical people to make a difference in what they're doing without having to rely on an IT team is not hyped enough, right? The idea that we can get people all across our business operating more efficiently without having to go and get a ton of money to run a big initiative and depend on IT and all the things that go with that, but actually getting that in the hands of those folks and helping them to make their day-to-day life easier and get operating leverage is huge.
If you're making technology decisions that impact people, budgets, and outcomes, you're in the right place. Welcome to Insight On, the podcast for leaders who need technology to deliver real results. No fluff, no filler. Just the insight you need before your next big decision. Hi, I'm your host, Jillian Viner, and today I'm joined in the studio with Jeremy Hodge. Well, Jeremy, thanks for joining me here today.
Yeah, glad to be here, Jillian.
We were at Ignite, what feels like a long time ago. It was only a couple weeks ago.
That's right, yeah.
We took the advantage not just to hear what was going on with Microsoft, but really just to sit down with experts from Insight, from Microsoft, from other partners, and even a couple clients, which we will hit on those in a future episode.
Yep.
But it was really fascinating because I remember the drive from the airport to the venue. Billboard after billboard was an AI-focused ad.
Yep.
Then you get to the venue and booth after booth, it's AI.
More AI messaging
More
everywhere.
AI messaging everywhere. And I think more than anything, my biggest takeaway was that the conversation very much is AI centered, but it is still feels like it's so much hype.
I think we saw that with all the messages and what people are saying. Everyone's talking about AI, you can't escape it, but a lot of uncertainty of what do we actually do to drive real business outcomes. So I thought a lot of discussions we had with various leaders and our partners and the clients really reinforced what are the steps you need to take to actually drive real AI results.
Yeah. And I think what was kind of comforting too was to find out that, in fact, everybody's at a very different stage of adoption.
That's right.
You've got organizations who are just getting started with Copilot as one example, and you have organizations who are already into agent building and are really excited about Microsoft's Agent 360 feature coming out.
Yeah, a lot of different announcements we heard from the Microsoft side. They also have the Anthropic models now available. So a huge amount of opportunity for builders. And I think what was interesting when we talked to everyone about AI, especially for the leaders, it wasn't about models. It wasn't about, what's the latest benchmark. It came back to what is your use case? Think about your organizational culture and what's the outcome you're trying to achieve. And that was the number one principle we heard again and again when talking to people about how do you get beyond the hype and into the how.
Yeah. And as I said, we talked to a lot of different leaders. I think our very own CMO, Hilary Kerner, set this up really nicely. Let's take a listen.
So the thing that I hear the most when I'm talking to other leaders is that the results that they're getting don't live up to the hype. So the promise of AI is so enormous and so incredible, and they're expecting these results to be on par with that promise, and they're just not. And I think that the reason that people aren't seeing big enterprise transformative results is that they're not doing big enterprise transformations. They're doing small projects in different places, and their people, each individual person is maybe getting a little bit more productive, or maybe they're eking out a little bit of cost savings. But the real value, that real promise is going to come when you have systematized your AI deployment, when it is integrated in your enterprise systems. And anybody who has a tech stack knows that that is so much easier said than done, because your tech stack is not a brand new, beautiful, off-the-shelf thing that you bought yesterday. It has been acquired over decades. It is in various states of modernization. Your data is sitting in different places. Maybe you have a cloud strategy. Maybe you had a data modernization strategy. Hopefully you've got your security strategy intact. But the fact is, the vast majority of companies and leaders that I talk to are grappling with tech debt of some form or another. And in order for AI to be really, really meaningful, it's like anything else. It's got to work with your enterprise systems. And that is not a flip the switch, off the shelf kind of deployment. And I think that that's why there's so much, it's not disappointment, it's just like a reality check, you kind of come crashing down to earth. And that's in the cases where they actually got it off the ground and the deployment was actually successful. I talked to a whole other host of leaders who have barriers to even getting their pilots off the ground because of things like security issues, data issues, or skills issues are a really big one that we see a lot. Workforce change and modernization that needs to happen.
Hilary hit on so many interesting obstacles that I think people tend to overlook. I love how she mentions that some organizations are struggling with pilots because of things like security or data. We hear that all the time. And I think one of the biggest lessons that leaders can take away from this is understanding before you start an AI initiative, who needs to be with you at the table from the very start.
Yep.
And we actually got really great insight about this from our Chief Information Security Officer, Jeremy Nelson.
InfoSec needs to be invited to the team. You need to have business people, like people who genuinely understand, like, what are the things that make this business flow? Like, what are our objectives as an organization, and how do we achieve those? Who are the primary consumers? But just understanding the dynamics of how the business functions. So you need representation from the business in those early conversations. You need your data team along with you. Definitely don't ever forget about infrastructure, right? At the end of the day, we're talking about data. Data needs to move from point A to point B. You need to make sure that it's being done as a reliable and efficient way possible. And so that's your infrastructure team. A lot of folks will often forget about infrastructure. And sometimes we're not necessarily talking about public models. We're not even talking about private cloud-based models. We're starting to see more and more where these models are gravitating towards on-prem, whether that's edge types of computing system or edge type AI solutions that are coming out, to even running on individual laptops. And in order to make that happen, your infrastructure, your devices team, they need to be a part of that conversation. So really representation across, various different business stakeholders, InfoSec team, you want to have data representation, and you want to have your traditional infrastructure team. That's who's in the family truckster with me, at least.
So I love Jeremy talking about the team you need to make AI successful. Hilary talked about the barriers she saw, and then hearing everyone from the business users to the infrastructure team to InfoSec. But what's really missing still is that AI literacy, right? You need everyone to be on the same page in terms of how to think about AI from a business standpoint down to the technical. And Mike Morgan, who's our Senior Vice President of APAC, really touched on how do we think about skills, how do we think about enablement, and how do you build that culture of AI literacy? I'm curious if you could talk about the barriers to AI adoption. As companies go from experimentation to actually driving impact, what's the one thing that's really holding them back right now?
Look, it's interesting because I sort of think back to, I think we're at the same point now as we were in the early days of cloud, when there's a lot of demos, there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of people playing with tools, and the heavy lifting's not quite as sexy, but it's where it becomes substantial. So it's the downstream infrastructure pieces, it's the integration, and most of all, it's the people implementation. So it's change management, it's helping people to work in different ways. That's what makes things stick, and that's the piece that we're focused on at the moment.
I want to double click into the people aspect a bit more. So we talk about AI literacy a lot, right, and how important that is. What would you say is the most effective way to drive that in your organization? And also on the flip side of that, what's sort of the worst way that you don't want to drive
I might start
with
the worst way first, because I see this in our organization, even internally, that we have people at different levels of maturity and comfort with AI and the opportunity in front of them. And those at the lowest end are kind of apprehensive. They have a fear that they're falling behind, and their natural instinct is to ask for training programs, for sort of academic support. And this world's moving way too fast for that. So by the time we sit down, we find a provider, we have a course. By the time the course is developed, it's probably 60% out of date. So it's not that kind of a learning opportunity. It really is creating safe spaces, and I like to think of it as being sandboxes where people feel free to be messy. And that creates the environment where people can experiment and make mistakes and just get familiar with the tooling to understand what's possible in a low risk, low pressure environment, and then it sticks all by itself.
So it sounds like you're having a lot of different employees experiment, not just technical folks, but what does it mean for more of a business user who's using Gen AI and what it can do for them?
Yeah, it's a funny thing as I was reflecting on this earlier. I think the people who are leaning in furthest, fastest are actually leaders and executives. So I would say I'm personally one of the most avid and excited users of AI, because in my environment, I'm not having to disrupt core systems to get things started. I'm able to do things that are meaningful right from the get-go, because a lot of my day involves information, planning, scheduling, meetings, and those sorts of areas. You can get big boosts out of AI without too much effort, and they're very meaningful. The thing I like about that is that I think when leaders visibly display their willingness to change behaviors to get advantage, and they do it in a messy way, it kind of creates a halo effect that people kind of inherit that freedom to be messy, and they see their leaders doing it and they start to do it themselves.
So you shouldn't feel you have to get it perfect right out of the gate. You can be
No, I think perfect
experiment
is definitely the enemy of good here. And that is something that holds people back, is that, like most technology, people that are coming to it for the first time are almost afraid of not doing things the right way. So in the fear of that, they kind of hold back from experimenting and being free to just mess around and see what's possible.
I like Mike's little humble brag in there that he's been an early adopter, and also that he's just giving teams permission to get a little messy and experiment and even fail at times, because we're all learning this no matter where you are in your journey. Everyone's figuring this out.
Yep. And experimentation's so key. We've heard that again and again. You just have to get out there and start using it. And I love what he said about how execs aren't tethered to some of the same processes and workflows. So there's a bit of a freedom to just experiment, which I think is encouraging to hear from a leader, because often they might not be super AI literate. So the fact that they're diving in and are encouraging that tops down, as well as their employees are working on the bottoms up use cases as well.
Yeah. I was particularly interested to find out how that adoption is going on at Microsoft, because obviously Microsoft is driving the AI. They're releasing Copilot. So you know that internal adoption has to happen. And it has to happen at a speed that is, faster than the market, which is a really hard thing to keep up with. So it was really great to actually sit down with one of the leaders from Microsoft, Julie Sanford, and she gave us kind of a behind-the-scenes look at how Microsoft has performed as Client Zero.
What we have learned through this process of driving wall-to-wall coverage for Copilot. Like, we do believe Copilot is the next cloud socket to go in, whether that's a free to paid, free to agent, securing that environment is just such an amazing monetization opportunity for our partners, regardless of what your business model is. And the learning that we had around the importance of being customer zero, that was an amazing set of learnings. Like, what it takes to actually adopt AI internally, and it's not for the hype. You've got to have champions inside the organization identifying business processes that could be simplified. Where can we take the monotony out of somebody's role that then frees up their ability to go and either drive revenue, look at new markets, be more creative in their environment. So that concept of customer zero was so important for us to invest the first 3 months of this journey with our channel partners. And those are the ones that have adopted that internally, like you all have. The amount of value you're delivering to your customers is exponential, because your sellers are talking from firsthand experience. And so I would say the understanding the use case, being your own customer zero, is what is going to turn this from hype into real business value.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And AI has been a huge part of our journey at Insight. And I think one of our biggest takeaways is understanding that the technology is only half the battle.
Totally.
It really is the change management, upskilling.
Yes.
How specifically is Microsoft helping your teams with that hurdle of upskilling and change management?
Yeah. Huge investment just in our own internal readiness. And so we don't take that for granted, and it's really nice the way our skilling actually works for ourselves, for our customers, and our partners. It's all the same. So just a massive investment in that. We were challenged as business leaders to come up with our top 10 scenarios that we believed AI could help us solve. And that was a real paradigm shift for us, because we have typically, and I'm sure you do the same thing, where you write these long business requirement documents, they go into engineering comes back with a cost around what it's going to take to actually deliver that business outcome. This was a reversal, because it put the accountability on the business leader, not IT and not just engineering. It's more of a collaboration, and that actually forced us to get better faster, because it's not like I want to apply technology to this problem. It gave us the freedom to reimagine what we want to accomplish within said project, said area, said business model, and have to understand how AI can actually help either reshape that business process or help us have a better engagement with our customers, which for me is our partners. And so it really, that was probably the most beneficial thing we did as a company, because again, you've got business leaders now having to be accountable for understanding how AI can help improve the mission that they're on, and that was a game changer for us.
Yeah, I like that. What's been like your biggest lesson or takeaway through this experience? Something that maybe you're sharing with business leaders who are asking the question of we know we had to adopt AI, but it feels very daunting figuring out how to do it.
Yeah.
What would you tell them?
Two things. Don't underestimate the cultural investment you have to make along the change management that you were just talking about a moment ago. Depending on where you are in the world, too, there's a different level of comfort or I would say comfort around what does this mean. And we've had some conversations around, well, we don't know if we want to go all in because we want to we want to protect jobs, or we don't want jobs to go away. I mean, one very specific example, we were starting to talk about Agent Riley, which is a Agentic sales agent that we use internally to help our prospecting and improve the quality of opportunities and getting those to our sales leaders. And every time we engage in a conversation like that, and there's any sort of concern that you're picking up in the room around, well, I don't know if we want to do that. I think what was the freeing conversation we had is nobody's not experimenting right now. Whatever platform they're using, every employee in every company around the world is using some form of AI. Mm-hmm. And so flipping it from a fear-based to an empowerment conversation, that was when we started seeing eyes go, okay, let's lean into it, because then we can actually be on the frontier part of it and define how that can help us rather than wait for something to happen to us. So I think that was a really good in-the-moment learning that we had. So that's why I would say change and cultural, those two things. And then just the sheer importance of the investment in skilling. I can't hit that one hard enough. And again, not just on the technical side, but the change management, the adoption, and then also the sales aspect of it. How are you positioning the value of AI so customers can see the ROI? Because we've talked a lot about, do we need 1,000 use cases that we're going to go and work on? No, there's probably the first 5 that really matter that are going to pay off in the first 12 months. That was a learning moment for us to go through with both customers and partners.
I love Julie's focus on this customer zero notion and how you have to build the belief internally before you can really do that amongst your customers, your constituents. And it was also interesting to hear her talk about how the leadership got together and identified those 10 business use cases, right? So again, going back to, you need to start with those use cases that are most relevant to you. She talked about the culture as one of the most important factors, and that's huge coming from a company like Microsoft that is a huge technology provider. They're an AI leader. It goes back to those fundamentals. AI matters, but in some ways, these other factors matter a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree. And I think getting that buy-in from the start is also really important. When I think back to what Hilary was talking about, with just a lot of the frustration and sort of the expectations not quite being met because the hype has been so big. And the only way, I think, to really understand the actual tangible potential of AI is to be hands-on and to discover the use cases that are going to impact your day-to-day, not just the overall business impact. But I think once we get into that, you really start to see that there is tangible potential out there. And Bijah gives us some really good use cases of exactly that.
I think that the capability that AI gives organizations and non-technical people to make a difference in what they're doing without having to rely on an IT team is not hyped enough, right? The idea that we can get people all across our business operating more efficiently without having to go and get a ton of money to run a big initiative and depend on IT and all the things that go with that but actually getting that in the hands of those folks and helping them to make their day-to-day life easier and get operating leverage is huge.
Do you have an actual tangible use case of that, an example?
Yeah, so we've got a ton of use cases. Insight, the thing I love about Insight is that we've been doing AI-related work for years, right? AI's on everyone's lips right now. It's all the hype, all the buzz, but we've got years worth of stories in data, machine learning, AI. I think one of the places that I've been really impressed with that, we have a company that we work really closely with that is an oil and gas refining and exploration company, and we've helped them to establish a capability to do exactly that, which is empower their people to go out and produce agents, produce machine learning models, whatever it may be, for the specific problems in their area. And what it does for us as Insight is great because it gets us connected to all these different parts of their business, right? Where we can actually start to help them solve problems just beyond just IT. And to me, that's a lot of the power of AI is it's not just things for IT, it's actually getting out into the business and solving the problems that all of these business areas face, especially the revenue generating customer facing sides of the business, right? Which we all know is the bread and butter of any company. So I think that's, an example of that, and I can be more specific if you like. But
yeah, I mean, I think a lot of the back office use cases are things that we really see value from, sort of the unglamorous things that actually make a huge difference.
And they do, by the way.
Yeah. Give us just like one concrete example of that.
Yeah, so a really good back office one. So we work with a major airline company. You would recognize it. It's one of just a handful of really big brands. And what we actually help them to do using machine learning and AI is to come up with a staffing optimization solution. So they have issues where airline gets shut down, the weather's terrible, they've got hundreds of thousands of bags that they have to get distributed, get to the right people. And as you know, if they lose them, they're paying claims, they're losing a lot of money when that happens. Yeah. So having a way to optimize their staffing, if they know, hey, we're gonna have a huge storm coming, or we've got a crisis that's gonna shut us down and give us an influx of bags sitting around, and to optimize their staffing ahead of it and make sure they've got the right people to get all of that handled and not lose money having to pay for all those bags. I think that's a really great example of something that, to use your word, unglamorous, right? It's not something we're seeing, it's not flashing on a screen anywhere, but it makes a pretty big difference to people when they're traveling and their bag doesn't get lost.
Absolutely.
And to the bottom line of the airline company when they're not having to reimburse people for, hundreds of dollars of lost clothing and, prized possessions and everything else.
When I think about AI use cases, I think about, things like call center transformation or fraud detection, a lot of the ones that we hear day to day. But it was really interesting talking to Alex Mooney from Logitech, and he really made me rethink, the role of the device in an AI context. We've heard about AI PCs, and Logitech obviously makes things like mice and keyboards. And it was interesting hearing about all these sort of micro moments in our day. We all do the copy paste, or we can almost memorize the click sequence to do something in an application. But he really unpacked how can AI help make those interactions a lot more simple.
Every time that you have to go and interact with your Copilot assistant that's helping you with your workday, you're having to really do task switching. You're switching from the tool that you're in to the sidebar or to a separate portal. If you've got a document someone just emailed you and you need to ask questions about how relevant that document is, you're going to have to move that document or do something with it. So being able to just take these reproducible steps and call them with a single click of a button right at your fingertips, I think is a really nice way to bring AI into your actual human workflow, the reality of your human workflow. So one of the things I do is the forward button on my mouse on my MX4 is actually written with a Smart Action recipe in Options Plus that takes my highlighted text, it automatically invokes Copilot, pastes it, adds a little bit of a custom prompting that I like that gives it some context around what I do, what kind of insights I'm looking for, and then submits the prompt to get an answer and copies the response.
All with just one click.
All of that with a single click.
Wow.
And so if you sent me a chat message and I get it in Teams and I'm not sure how to answer, I really don't have time, I can highlight, click one button, get a response, and resend it back to you in a matter of seconds. And that keeps me from task switching. So Microsoft's Work Trends Index had a really interesting update that talked about the infinite workday. And what we found as a part of that was that users are being interrupted in the course of their day approximately every 2 minutes. So around 270-ish times a day. And so all of these interruptions are causing users to have to go to work and then break their focus flow, and go to work and break their focus flow. Yeah. It may seem like a tiny thing that you're improving 3 or 4 seconds here or there, but in the context of this kind of ever-increasing workday, those really add up, and it means you're getting more done with that 2 minutes of focus before that next interruption comes in.
You know, we talk all the time about AI changing how we work, but you don't really think about AI impacting the technology devices that we're using. So that was such an interesting use case to hear from him with the mouse click.
Yeah, it's something I wouldn't have thought of, but it makes sense when you add up, again, all those little interactions. And if you can simplify that and you shave a few seconds here and there and you times that, hundreds of times a day, it really does make a difference in your workflow. Now, we can't talk about hype to how without talking about agents, which was a huge focus at this conference. Microsoft rolled out a number of new updates to agent orchestration and capabilities in Copilot. And so I asked Sunny Wang, who's our Agentic AI lead in Canada, break down what does it actually mean to be agentic? What are the different types of agents? And I loved her response on this.
From a client perspective, there's 3 different tiers of AI in terms of the power of it. And so the first thing is think of retrieval augmented generation RAG. This is your chatbot, this is your ChatGPT. You ask a question, it sort of goes through its back-end data, and then it comes up with an answer. That has been around for quite a few years now. And think of this as your Copilot, for instance. A lot of clients we're seeing using these tools say, wow, it's so great for personal productivity, for finding things. So that's actually very real and in play today. The second thing we also saw a lot at this conference is deep reasoning. So think of more advanced models that think like an analyst or think like a master student, and they're outputting a lot of really good work product that a person can then go and just edit or take a look at or understand. And deep reasoning is currently embedded in pretty much all of the big AI providers. Microsoft has Researcher, Gemini, etc. So that's another level, and that's also real and also being used. Again, tons of value. The third element is really around the whole autonomous piece, and that was a huge theme of this conference. Now it's emerging, right? We've had RPA for a long time, but I would say the whole autonomous agents is like RPA on steroids. That's how I've heard other people describe it. And honestly, in Canada, this is still very nascent. So clients are coming, they're super excited. They can see how it can now go to workflows, maybe even mirroring whole departments. But where it's actually coming into play, I think, is still emerging. And so that's the work that we're doing now, is guiding clients through that process, but also building agents and helping them set up different workflows within their environment too.
What's one thing you're tired of explaining to people about agents that you just have to kind of reinforce over and over again?
I think it's just this idea of humans as operators is super important. Now, of course, the space is evolving so fast, and I'm not an expert by any means, like a frontier lab expert, so maybe in a year or 2 years, humans will no longer need to be operators. But even with looking at the agents that Microsoft has built, there is a hand back to the human when it comes to more pivotal steps, or sometimes it fails or it doesn't do everything perfectly. And again, you only know that if you've really played with it and understood its limits. And so whenever a client comes to me with good reason and says, hey, I'm really worried, I would say, have you tested it against your workflow? Have you conducted an evaluation and understood where it may or may not fall short? And often it's not as perfect as a person, or it takes things 80% of the way. Now that's still valuable, but I think it's just grounding everybody in that knowledge that humans are still operators. It's like a co-pilot or a support. That's still super critical, at least in this current state as we record today.
We had some really interesting conversations. Everything from the hype to the how, the use cases, the barriers getting in their way. I don't know about you, but I think one of the biggest takeaways I have as a user is just the reality of this actually becoming a tangible thing. AI is coming to the workplace in really good, positive ways. When we hear the use cases about, making some of the tedious tasks easier, less disruption in our workflow, having agents that work with us to do things, it makes me very optimistic about the future of the workforce.
Yeah, and I think we also heard a nice roadmap of sorts, right? So Hilary started talking about the need for integration and the need to think about all your different systems. We heard, from Mike and Julie in terms of how do you drive that culture change? How do you drive that skill building? Heard a lot of different great use cases as well, whether that is, those sort of micro moments and using, say, a Copilot integration with a device to have less friction there, all the way to a larger transformation with an airline. So you definitely see that there's one, this is very real today, and that there is a path forward, and there is a how through that hype.
Yeah, absolutely. And the good news is it doesn't matter where you are in the journey. We're all somewhere along that road, and you don't have to take it alone. And so we thankfully were able to talk to a couple more experts on those topics. So I think that'll be our next episode.
That's right. We're going to dive into risk and governance, all those important aspects that once you're up and running, you need to make sure you're doing it securely, you're doing it responsibly. So looking forward to hearing more.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Insight On. If today's conversation sparked an idea or raised a challenge you're facing, head to insight.com. You'll find the resources, case studies, and real-world solutions to help you lead with clarity. If you found this episode to be helpful, be sure to follow Insight On, leave a review, and share it with a colleague. It's how we grow the conversation and help more leaders make better tech decisions. Discover more at insight.com. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are of those of the host and the guests and do not necessarily reflect on the official policy or position of Insight or its affiliates. This content is for informational purposes only and should not be considered as professional or legal advice.